I'm the director of the here at the PRCHN Research Center for Healthy Neighborhoods and a professor in the Department of Population and Quantitative Health Sciences.
And I'm Rachel Gardenhire. I work here at the PRC as a research data analyst for both impact, CTSC, and this.
And has been responsible for leading this thing, this massive thing that you're going to see over the next hour. So our title of our talk is Dave's Markets, the Joe's Corner Store. Thank you, Rachel, that was a good title. A look at the Cleveland retail food environment and healthy food access. I think we actually started out thinking we would do a lot more, but we have narrowed it down to try to focus in on like 2 or 3 points, because we also know that it will be very easy for a lot of hands to go up in the middle of this. So we're going to ask that we try to get through this, and we'll come back to anything. Suzanne's going to keep notes if there is something early on that people want to hear about, then we'll make sure that we come back and cover. So we're going to go over the history and methodology of something called the Cleveland Food and Tobacco Retail Assessment Project. It's a part of a larger project here at the PRC that started 8 years ago in 2012. So we're going to talk about this annual data collection and what we've done with it over the last 8 years. From there, we're going to talk about a store classification system that we've used to basically classify all the information. Talk a little bit about the role of transportation here in Cleveland around the food access and shopping availability. Rachel's going to talk about the whole evolution of the convenience store, so the big box, dollar stores and CVS's. We're going to talk a little bit, if we can, about the changes that we see, and then talk a little bit about perceptions and availability. There's no way that we'll get through all this. But just to have an idea that there's a lot we could talk about, but we're going to try to, we thought the best thing for us to do was to really spend time telling you what it is. And I know a lot of you are in the room, have participated in this, or have been involved in it at some point. So we want people to know about it because it is a database that is now usable, a longitudinal database that's usable. And so we also are looking for those students out there that are looking for projects that to keep this going. So we first would like to acknowledge this is a massive team. It goes back to 8 years. And so first we really want to acknowledge the annual coordinators. So this was, as you're going to see, this was an annual data collection that a small army of students would descend on the PRC. And we would send them out to look at every food retail across the city of Cleveland. And so we had coordinators. Oop, that was supposed to go slower, but that's okay. So starting way back from Henry Eliason to Stephanie Pike, Gwen Donnelly, Sarah Jones, Anna Katz, Maddie. I mean, I think everybody has had some touch of this, right? Kenya, Moyers, Hannah Johnson, Ortis Yankee, and Rachel Gardenhire. And we should acknowledge right off too that Ortis has been extremely helpful to us even up until, I guess, Monday or yesterday, in helping us put some of these maps together. But he is actually on his way, or he's probably on his way still to Ghana, back for the holidays. So he was sorry that he couldn't be here. Rachel's going to talk a little bit more about the data collection teams, because they in themselves are this amazing thing. But we also want to go back in history a little bit, because we'd like to thank Dr. Jessica Kelly Moore from sociology, who was involved in the project early on, and gave us the initial, we think, Eric and I are trying to recreate this, gave us the original classification system that we built on. And I have to thank Erica, as you'll hear a little bit too. Erica was the first one that said, we got 10 students, let's see if we can do this. And it went large scale in 2012, okay? And then we obviously have to thank lots of different funding agencies that have helped us over the past 8 years. So overall at the PRC, we launched a project called the Neighborhood Environment Assessment Project, way back, probably even earlier than 12. And the idea, this was one of our priorities, which is place-based surveillance. And the goal of this priority of our center has been to gain a better understanding, really, of the built environment and the landscape here in Cleveland, but also to be able to provide data out. So a lot of these different things that we've done were done just by us, or we did them in partnership with a community partner that was looking for this kind of data. So the first two that we're going to talk about, and we're predominantly going to talk about the food retail, but the food retail and the tobacco retail, as you'll hear a little bit, are in the same data collection process. And Erica, when did you start the tobacco? When did that get added? Oh, you probably have this in your thing too. When did tobacco get?
In detail in 2014.
We've
It
had it
seems
since 12,
but yeah.
more December.
So you've got about 5 or 6 years of that as well. But we're going to focus today just on the food retail aspect. But we have gone out, our students have gone out and audited the assets of community gardens, all the farmers markets. We've done parks and playgrounds, water fountains for a project with CMSD, right? Through the impact study, we did a thing called SFEET, which was going into all the schools that the impact study was working with to do assessments of the school food environment. And lastly, Impact also did a number of things called neighborhood assessment inventories, which is going to the actual blocks of neighborhoods to assess. Okay, so I'm going to swap. Rachel's going to take it from here.
All right. So as Elaine mentioned, the students have really been the core of this project, really the heart and soul of getting all this major data that you're going to see has been collected. And they go out every day to every food store location in the city of Cleveland. So definitely want to say thank you to all of them. These faces that are in the pictures up here aren't even half of them, but just to put a few faces to people you may recognize, our data collection team is really what this is about. So to talk a little bit more in specific about the team and how we even get this large data collection to happen, I'll start with assembling the team. So we typically hire about 8 to 10 interns to complete ground truthing and assessments of all the food retail locations within the city of Cleveland in the two-phase process through ground truthing and assessments in 10-week internship. Now, what does that really mean? We are asking that about 2,000 stores be ground truth and assessed within a 10-week internship at 20 hours a week. So this truly is a great undertaking, and we really have a good methodology that's been efficient in getting this completed. Our teams have been built from both undergraduate and graduate students. They've represented various majors and fields of study from universities across the country. And they've also come in with a range of experience in some essential skills that are necessary for getting this kind of data collection done, but they've certainly left with a great immersion and great experience in aspects of community engagement and entering the community and collecting data in a respectful way from the community standpoint, knowledge of the city of Cleveland, and when I say the city of Cleveland, I mean the whole city of Cleveland. I don't mean knowledge of just downtown and the hot spots for where the bars are, but literally every corner of Cleveland, they know it when they come out. Reading maps, that's a skill that is fading out from people's education. So they come in, a lot of them don't know how to read maps, but it's a very important skill for this project. So they leave with extensive experience in that, and also, of course, data collection, entry, and quality assurance. So I want to talk about our two-phase process of this project, the first of which is ground truthing. So ground truthing is the process in which data collectors survey for the presence of stores through direct observation by doing windshield tours of literally every street of Cleveland. It's been identified in the literature as the gold standard for identifying food stores. And how do we start this? So for most years, ground truthing was done at the census tract levels. So our interns would go out and literally drive every street in the city of Cleveland and look for these food store locations. This past year, we piloted doing it combined ground truthing and assessments at the neighborhood level. So still looking on every street within the city of Cleveland. However, now we've combined it to be a little bit more efficient by doing it by the neighborhood and combining our two-phase process. So to equip them and get them ready to go out and ground truth, we give them maps like such that define the catchment area and also plot all the locations of noted food store locations. They also go out and with a master list that's informed by the previous year's data collection of what we've seen with the store names, the address, and they update the status of the stores, confirming their presence and the presence of new locations within the catchment area. In 2012, obviously that's our first year we did this, where do you start? We actually started with a list from the food vendor inspections of all the locations that had been previously audited by the food inspectors in the previous year. From then on, though, it's been actually what our interns have gone out and seen that informs the master list of what to look for. Here's an example of one of our neighborhood maps that we would give our NEAP teams. This is one of 34 neighborhoods in the city of Cleveland, and each dot here is an address where we have located a food store at some point during our data collections. So now I want to talk about the second phase of the project, which is actually the assessment of these locations. So we created a one-page assessment tool that's used to capture the availability of specific food items, information about prepared or ready-to-eat foods within these locations, store characteristics, and tobacco availability and advertising. We then use the items collected to classify retailers based on the availability of these food items collected and their store characteristics. The tool has changed a little bit over time, but it's consistently collected several items of interest. And we're going to take a closer look so you guys can really get an idea of what it is that we capture, because there's several assessment tools in the food environment landscape that you can use. So let's see what we actually collected. So we collect information on the quantity and quality of fresh fruits and vegetables, the quantity of canned or frozen produce, which we consider processed. We collect information on the presence of select WIC items like milk, eggs, whole wheat bread, different types of cereals. But also we do capture some of the unhealthy food items like alcohol, high sugar drinks, chips, and candy. In addition, information about prepared foods to help understand if this is a restaurant or a takeout spot versus a gas station that happens to sell prepared foods as well. Store characteristics, for example, participation in some local healthy retail programs, we collect information like that. And finally, tobacco information including availability, product placement, advertisement, and compliance with local policies like Tobacco 21. So all of this is built into this assessment tool. And once our interns have been trained in both phases of ground truthing and performing assessments, we send them out to the trenches. They go into every spot of the community within Cleveland to collect the data. And I did want to point out, in this top corner here is something we've developed. It's an information card, and it really helps with, so yes, we've been doing these audits for so long, but not every store, not every employee is going to remember that we were here last summer doing the same thing. They're there to do business. We're there to collect information. They come in with clipboards. They might look like health inspectors. Like, there's a lot to go on. So this is a little tool that we did to help bridge that gap of giving them the information so that they're informed of what we're doing, why we're there, and what we do with this information, so that they can then grant permission for us to assess the stores. So assessments happen. We collect 2,000 stores data, and then we built the database. So as Elaine stated a little bit earlier, for about 7 years, our data stood alone as individual yearly collections. However, in about 2017, we started the undertaking of creating a longitudinal database to look at really the history of the whole environment. So this has resulted in a single longitudinal place-based database that captures food retailers, fast food chains, restaurants, tobacco retailers, all within the Cleveland city limits from 2012 to currently 2019. So what this means is that every address that has ever been recorded as selling food items or tobacco items now has a running record of all our assessment data over these years. It captures geolocations, store openings and closures, changes in store names and ownership, and in addition, our store classification system reflecting changes in products sold in the store, which we're going to talk about a little later. However, as a data manager, I know what this looks like, but I think it's a really good way to conceptualize what this means and what it means to be a place-based database is that I give you an applied example. So I picked a neighborhood, Brooklyn Center, and we're going to say that this address is 1 Main Street. So in our data set, 1 Main Street is your identifier here. So in 2012, I can tell you that there was an Aldi at 1 Main Street. In 2014, I can tell you that Aldi's permanently closed. And then I can also tell you that in 2017, because we've used this place-based orientation, that a Family Dollar store opened in that very same location. And using our classification system, you can even tell a more broad story to say that per our classifications, this neighborhood at this address in this specific geolocation was a large grocery store. And then you can map the loss of a large grocery store for that community. And then finally, the gain of a convenience store. So we'll talk a little bit more about the implications of this. But really, using this place-based approach, it tells such a good story of really capturing all the changes and the ebbs and flows within the retail environment that we know is changing day by day, year by year. And now I'm going to pass it off to Elaine to talk a little more.
All right, so before we start, because we are going to show you some maps of Cleveland, and we know that most of you, many of you know the Cleveland neighborhoods, but we think it would be a little bit helpful to just orient yourself, right? So as you know, the star is where we are. This is where Case is. This is our famous Crooked River. I had to hand draw, so I have no idea. It doesn't reflect the actual curves. But you see downtown, so you have sort of orientation of east side and west side. Okay, so everybody has a sense, but they're all very well-defined neighborhoods. And in something, if we will get to, we also have data from residents who live in these neighborhoods and identify with the neighborhoods. And if we can get to it, we'll share some of that as well. But so everybody has a sense of this, because we're not always going to have the neighborhood names on the maps themselves. So we're going to go through the classification system. So Eric and I were just trying to recreate as well. So at the time, somewhere between 2009, I think, and 2012, there was a lot of work being done nationally on these classification systems. And we had actually been doing these kinds of audits in the stores that were related to, initially related to FreshLink. 4 stores, right? Or 4 neighborhoods, right. And so that we had some idea, and the classification had come from that. But then when Erica launched this in 12 to go citywide, then we then applied that same classification system to it. So overall, it has 5 basic store types, food retail store types. The supermarket, the large grocery, the small grocery, a corner store, and a convenience store. And you'll start to see that those they can be very similar. But we also now, and especially in the latter parts of this database, have been trying to get much cleaner in identifying additional stores outside of that. Bars, liquor stores, tobacco stores, specialty foods that only sell like one thing, so a bakery or a butcher, fast foods and restaurants. And obviously fast foods and restaurants we know provide prepared foods, but many of these other stores offer both prepared, so they can fall into that restaurant fast food category, or they offer fruits and vegetables or other foods that people can buy. And so that often falls into that convenience store, and we'll talk more about that specifically. But the classification for those 5 are based on numerous factors. One is the number of point-of-sale registers. Second is the availability of certain foods. So, for example, raw meat or milk. Eggs we've talked about this, eggs are not in the current classification system because we didn't start asking about that until later. But there are other things that as we move this classification system, we'll probably refine that. The availability of fresh fruit and availability of fresh vegetables, the availability of canned and frozen fruits and vegetables, the presence of an in-store bakery, and then what is the dedicated aisle space? And this becomes an important characteristic. So overall of this store, how many aisles are dedicated to food? Okay. So this is a quick breakout of the overall system. And we look to these 3 as being the 3 that are the most likely to be able to give a family an option to build a meal. All right? And you'll see why. But it doesn't mean that corner stores and convenience stores, and actually any of these, could not also provide those foods, but they don't fall into this classification system. So this was, Rachel, you did this right? Yes. Rachel's system for trying to wrap our heads around how to explain how this is classified, but also when the time came to actually not just classify each year, but then Hannah Johnson was the one that really, I think I took her, she had this amazing syntax that was like a tree. And the idea was to, it works on a basis of starting, does it fit this criteria? If it doesn't, you keep moving your way down. So let's start with the supermarket, all right? So supermarkets have to have all of these characteristics in our classification system. So they have to have 6 or more registers, they have to sell raw meat, have an in-store bakery, 50% or more of their aisles have to be dedicated to consumable, which is food or beverage products. They have to sell 6 or more different varieties of fresh fruit and 6 or more varieties of fresh vegetables. Similarly, 6 different varieties of both canned or frozen fruit and vegetables. They must sell 2% or whole milk, and they also must sell 1% or skim milk, so one of those 2 combinations. So when you think of a supermarket, these are what you think of, correct? So these are the supermarkets that are in Cleveland, and you'll see in the top left or bottom in each one of these, in 2018 there were 14 of these in the city of Cleveland. And this is a map. Now, I'm going to say to you too about this, we have varying things that we will flip back between 2018 and 2019 being the most current, because we didn't get to Ortis early enough. We didn't get 19 maps, and so so this is the 18 map. And so if you look at that, you might be able to guess where they are, but I'll spell them out for you. All right. So these are the supermarkets, and there are questions. I know my hand would go up immediately when I see this. Like, for example, why is the West Side Market considered a grocery store? And in our database, it goes on and off, partly because of does somebody sell milk? Does one of the vendors sell milk on the day they went in there? So there's a flexibility in some parts of this classification. But what do you see first in looking at this? Who's the biggest committed? Days, which we all knew, and mostly on the east side.
Right.
And on the west side, there's a lot more variety of Marks and Giant Eagles and, for example, this, if you can't see this is the Steelyard Walmart. Okay. So now step down the next step. So large grocery doesn't meet all of those. So they haven't met that. So then we look at the next step and says, okay, well, do they sell raw meat or have an indoor bakery? Not both, but do they have one of them? Again, as 50% of their aisles dedicated to consumable products, do they sell 3 or more different varieties of each one of these? And they must sell 1% or skim milk to be a large grocery. Now there are a couple of we discovered ethnic groceries that meet this whole criteria, except they don't sell milk. And so they are in our database now as a large grocery. Did you guys discover this last year? Or a while ago, yeah. And so these are the large groceries in Cleveland. All right, there were 44 of them in 2018 from Aldi's and Mark's, Eagle, Tony's Market. And you see some of them are big box national chains and some are local groceries. And they're fairly spread out across the city. But I hope you're going to start to see a bit of a pattern in where they're placed and where the holes are. So now, so you've got those are the 2. In many cases, if you think about it, they have only 3 varieties of fruit and only 3 varieties. So that means they could be qualifying as a large grocery as long as they sell milk and they have potatoes, onions, and carrots, right? So the questions I would love all of us to talk about is, what is our bare minimum of a store for a family to make a meal? And so I think that also fits to some of the work that I think that Morgan and the whole group that has been working on Bree, this idea of the how do you help stores provide that? And we'll talk a little bit hopefully more about that. And so small groceries, again, don't meet the criteria of the top 2, but they still have to be 50% more consumable, and they must sell at least 1 variety. So they have to sell at least 1 variety of fruit, 1 variety of a fresh vegetable, 1 processed can, 1 processed vegetable. Sorry. I thought this is where... Oh no, it's in the next one. It's the cornerstone one. Okay. And they must sell a variety of milk. So these are some small groceries in Cleveland. And some of them, most of them, they look pretty small, right? But they're in neighborhoods and they play a significant role. And I think one of the there were 50 of them in 2018. But I think one of the things we all ought to pay attention to is that, especially those of us that are used to the Giant Eagles and the Heinens and the Whole Foods and that, is that what makes a possible grocery store for a family. And so here's a small grocer, but this is what's inside. Now, granted, and I would say that I think I'm going to put, oh, I didn't do it there. I added some things to this. I'm wondering how. I hope I didn't lose it back into this. Anyway, good food here has been working. No, not copies. It's the next one. Sorry. So this is the one. This is the one that struck me the most. So Bree, when I was looking in your pictures, right? And so this is the Good Harvest Food Market in Asiatown. And would you know that that is inside of it? All right. So again, I think you need to challenge some of our own stereotypes in that also. But I also would say that if you're a resident living in that neighborhood, I think how stores look are important. And so if folks don't know, if you're new to the neighborhood, you don't know what's in it, would you know that was the quality of food inside? This one is probably the most striking, and I realize this is probably more the result of the teamwork, right? But this is Paul's, and this is inside that little market, which makes it a small grocery, all right? Okay, and here's, probably should have made it a little darker. You can see they're all spread out, but again, you start to see a pattern of where they all are, right? Or where many of them are. So again, we've just done the top three. We're going to spend a little bit of time on the bottom ones, but particularly this discussion of the corner store versus the convenience store. So the first one is a corner store. And really what separates a corner store from a convenience store is the proportion of aisles dedicated to a consumable products. So corner stores typically have more than 50% of their aisles dedicated, but in general what stops them from being a small grocery is that they lack one of them, one of these things, either a fresh fruit or a fresh vegetable or a process. But most commonly they're excluded from going up the categories because they lack the multiple fresh fruit and vegetables. Most corner stores have some degree of canned fruits and vegetables. And here are examples of corner stores across Cleveland, okay? And I think we want to say to ourselves too, one of the things we tell students all the time is that for some folks in some neighborhoods, this is their store. And so we say to students all the time, it may not look like the store that you or your family go to, but it's their store, and it's the neighborhood store. And so I think all of us having some better understanding of what are in people's neighborhoods and what's available, and what are we doing to basically help in the process of, if the stores are going to be the places, then how do you improve what's offered inside of them? And so that's how many corner stores there are. Okay, so remember thinking back on how many there were of the top three categories. This is of corner stores. And in general, this is what you think of when you think of a corner store, right? You know, you go in and it's got chips and the lottery tickets and alcohol and just lots of good junk food. And going back to remember, that's these, right? So in folks' neighborhoods, this is predominantly what is in their neighborhood. However, and we really do want to give a call out to the effort that's been going on, these are also in those corner stores now, but we do want to say that a good part of this is the result of good food here, right? And so this is an effort, and one of the reasons why it may or may not become part of the classification system is it sustainable? When the grant funding is over, do these go away? And that's what we're really looking to see, like what would make this become a sustainable model, right? And so I think, you know, we went back to all the grant stuff. This is mostly REACH and FAIR and Food Trust. I want to make sure we're giving everybody credit for this work. We're going to do, who else? Am I missing anybody? Anthem, okay. So there's a lot of effort right now in really looking at these stores, especially in the neighborhoods that are in need, and seeing if you're going to have this, can you at least increase this? If you notice over here, this is an entire little kiosk on how making a meal for tacos. Tacos are, yeah, burritos, okay. All right. So what's a convenience store? It's probably the same thing, but the big difference is that it doesn't have more than 50% dedicated to consumable products. And so in general, Rachel's going to talk a little bit more about this whole notion of the convenience store and the changes. A lot of us have heard about the dollar stores and CVS. We know that you go into a lot of these big box stores now, and they're national chains, and you see food. So, you know, one question over the time has been is, what can these move their way up into our system? And now we realize in our classification system, they can never come out of a convenience store because in general, they always will have less than 50% to consumable products. So you'll hear more about this. And these are some of the examples. And I think what's fun about them is there's the ones I just mentioned. So you have your big box retail stores. But you also have these stores. When I looked to see we did these, I'm like, I want to know how the interns knew to go into Frank's Bait Tackles Company, right? But it had to have been on a list at some point. And sure enough, I mean, these are places that sell other things, right? 2 of them are beauty stores or beauty places. But they also sell enough food then to be a part of our classification system. 116 of these across the city. A little more spread out, which is something that I think originally we thought might be hope, because they are spread out, and if they are national chains, you would think you'd have a little bit of play here. So this is what the whole picture looks like of just the food. So there's 5 categories. So supermarkets, large groceries, small corner stores, and convenience. What are the dominant colors? And we really didn't have orders pick these colors, but what do you see? Yeah, blue? Yeah. But you do see quite a bit of yellow, which is the large groceries, which I think that's another positive thing, and we'll see some of that in a bit. Okay, so just very quickly, we're not going to spend too much time on this because we could dive into this, but we wanted you to know that in the database then is also restaurants and takeout. We have every gas station, if you can walk in and get food, more than just, I think we've decided recently, more than just a bag of chips, right? But if you can get food, then that is in our database as well. And basically, restaurants and takeout are for the most part distinguished based on whether you pay first or pay after, whether you can dine in or dine after. So there's a little bit of fluidity in this as well. How many of them? We have 532 fast food and 338 restaurants. Okay, start to think about, so which ones of these maps have we had just like more than 200? Right, it's been mostly the corner store, the convenience store, and these. And these are the pictures. So on the left side is all the restaurants, and on the right side is all the takeout or fast food. There's some striking comparisons there as well. Yeah, I was shocked by seeing how few restaurants are in this space. And I will say, if we don't, because we probably aren't going to get to it, when you take the city of Cleveland and you ask residents what they think about the availability of food in their neighborhood, the two neighborhood clusters, the big clusters, who are the least satisfied with the food and the availability is here and here. So there's a pretty good check on the data as well as their perceptions. Okay, so real quickly, we're going to talk, this is more about the transportation piece. And I just want to kind of continue to put it in our heads. So what we wanted to do, we asked Ortis to look at using census data, and we only had access real quickly to 2012 data from the census on this. But this is a question in the census that asks people if they have access to a car. So not do they own a car, but do they have regular access to a car to be able to shop and things like that. So in this case, the darker the color, the fewer people basically that have access to a car. So the proportion is the percentage without access to a car. So you can see where the predominant space of car ownership is predominantly here and down here, which makes sense. This is also where a lot of the single-family homes, lots of home ownership is also right here. But that you see where it spreads out, and you can also see where the holes are. Now, I would also say that to put a perspective on it, at one point I had the little key at the bottom up against it so you could see, but if you happen to live in this neighborhood, you are 2 miles from a grocery store. So if you don't have a car, and we won't get into it, we wanted to, but there are, and if you actually are in that neighborhood, there is not a bus route to any of those 3. And you don't have access to a car. And that's the worst. So this is 50 to 75% of people in that census tract do not have access to a car. And they live 2 miles or more. Now, you might say, well, that's 2012. How does it look now? Well, here's the map from 2018. Now, in all fairness, so this one is gone, but that was the giant eagle that now is Simon. So that's back on in 19. But you can see this gap is even more significant And the gains that we have in grocery stores have been downtown basically and over on the west side. And then here we wanted to add the large groceries. So remember, a large grocery is a place that sells some milk, sells at least 3 vegetables, 3 fruits. So, but it also is some of these larger chain, the Aldis and things of that nature. But even in this case, you see that they have somewhat better access to these down here in Slavic Village, but it's still, in this area that is the least amount of car ownership, there's not a lot of availability. And I'm going to pass through this, but this was just, these are the views. This is looking at where supermarkets, large groceries, and small groceries are, and access. So given it all, so you're seeing all of it. This is their best shot of being able to go somewhere in their neighborhood to be able to shop for their families. This is unhealthy. So this is putting together all just the corner stores and the convenience stores. It doesn't even have the fast food chain. But to buy food, you begin to also see there's a lot of availability. So you start to see this ratio that's really not very even. Okay, and I think this is putting it together. Okay, so I'm now going to stop again.
All right, so Elaine started talking about this a little bit, but one of the things that I wanted to look at is this small food space and the evolving role of these national retail chains and their role on food access. So can these dollar stores and drugstores that, per our classification system, are a convenience store, because they're always going to carry more general merchandise and consumable products, can they fill the gap? Because these are at the national level. So are they the biggest contributors to change in the urban food environment in the past 10 years? One of the things that's great about our data set is that these, at the national level, have increased their footprint in both low-income urban and rural spaces astronomically in the past 10 years. So we also captured that here in Cleveland. And additionally, pharmacies, they haven't necessarily increased their footprint, but these are national brands that technically could have, and ideally they could take on the risk of supporting the infrastructure that would be needed to carry foods, healthy whole foods, without thinking too much about the cost, the return on investment and whatnot. These are stores that get deliveries at least once a week, in comparison to our locally owned and operated. So are they true substitutes for filling the gap to move into that small grocery space where we could make some changes on healthy food access? So we did witness a dollar store boom in Cleveland. In 2012, in our baseline data, we had a total of 66 of these national retail chains, half of them being Family Dollars, and then the rest of them majorly being the pharmacy convenience stores, and just a few Dollar Generals and Dollar Trees. But today in 2019, we have seen a significant increase, along with the rest of the nation, in the Dollar Generals and Dollar Trees within the city of Cleveland. Not as much change in this space. If anything, we've lost some of these stores, but not too many when actually looking at the numbers. But we now have 80 of these national chains, which I would like to note that Discount Drug Mart is an Ohio-based chain, so it's not national, but I want to make a point about it later, so I want you to see the numbers. But we have increased by 20%. So really, one of the things that I wanted to do is, okay, if these stores will technically never be classified outside of the convenience store because of their business model, let's look at more of a score of consistently collected items from 2012 and 2019 on our assessment form to give them a healthy food availability score to see, has there been any change to carry more of these ideal products? So this score includes scoring 1 point if you sell raw meat, 1 point for selling whole wheat bread, up to 2 points for selling milk, 1 point for selling either whole milk or 2%, 1 point for selling the low-fat varieties of skim or 1%. Fresh vegetables, which a store could score a maximum of 12 points for. Fresh fruit, another maximum of 12 points. The processed categories of frozen or canned vegetables, up to 4 points, and selling the processed variety of fruits, up to 4 points. So to break down a little bit more of the scoring system for my produce categories, because of how the data is collected, we categorize these by varieties of fruit or the varieties of vegetables sold. So you earn 1 point for increasing the steps of this category. So 1 point for selling 1 to 2, 2 points for 3 to 5, 3 points for 6 to 10, or if selling 11 plus, which would be akin to like a supermarket, you could score a total of 4 points for just the frozen or canned. But since we know that selling fresh produce is really a strong indicator of increasing healthy food access in environments, those scores were bumped up because that's really the gold standard. So you could score between 3 and 12 points for actually carrying those so that they would be weighted higher than just the processed varieties, as we call them. So scores in total could range from 0 to 36. And just for reference, before we see the table you just previewed, if a store sold all these items except a fresh fruit or vegetable, their maximum score could be 12. And I wanted to put that in there because we do know that in these spaces, they typically don't carry these. So just so you understand, if you don't sell any fresh produce, the maximum you could get is 12 to be, quote unquote, still carrying some of these healthy items. So now let's actually look at what the scores fell to. So in 2012, these were the mean scores for each location. Discount Drug Mart, our Ohio-based chain, having the highest mean score, but the rest of them, there's one Dollar Tree that exceeded 12, but the rest are not coming close to even selling the more shelf-based items, shelf life items. In 2019, we did see an increase, a slight increase, but not too much, because if we really, like for example, Dollar General, that means they sold 2 more items of 1 point. So there was an increase, however, not super large increase. And actually with the Dollar General example, I do have to point out that there's one single outlier in the group that scored above 12. There's one Dollar General that is in our southeast section of Cleveland that scored 33. So there's one Dollar General that means that they're actually selling some fresh produce. And I do want to point out that Dollar General is one of these national chains that is experimenting with testing their brand into the market space. So there are some Dollar General market stores in the nation. There's also this new branding called DGX, which functions as a very small convenience store, but really only carries food products, not as much as the general merchandise. So yes, there's one store where we've seen that maybe they're testing it in Cleveland, but I can tell you that one store is not a Dollar General market, and it's not a DGX store. It's still just their regular branded store, but perhaps we're seeing signs of things to change within this dollar store space into trying to bring more fresh fruits and vegetables into places of need. Because even when you look at the range, one thing I didn't mention, the ranges increased, they shifted, but not really that much for any specific category. Rite Aid, for example, there's one store that started selling 1 more of these items that we picked. However, our Discount Drug Mart, which is not the national-based chain, it is an Ohio-based chain that operates only in our state, they clearly took a leap into addressing some of these food access issues within the city and within their own brand, because they significantly jumped up. But I want to note that because they're Ohio-based, they may not be as married to the corporate structure as these other much larger retail chains. And the small grocery space of the Discount Drug Mart, I mean, this score is akin to what a supermarket would be. So the small grocery space is really where changes could be made in increasing food access within urban communities. And our Ohio-based chain, Discount Drug Mart, is filling somewhat of a gap here in our city. But I don't know if you know, but should you not, dollar stores and their relationship to both food access and retail development in low-income communities and being urban and rural have been a hotbed of attention at the national news level in the last years. Communities have began to recognize that in a lot of places, the infiltration of these stores, I mean, we saw that Dollar General and Dollar Tree just within the city of Cleveland were upwards of a 650% increase. So they're noticing that the density and the that they're pocketing into these locations, they're beginning to push out some of their local small grocery spaces that are contributing to healthy food access where they can at a smaller scale. And now cities like Cleveland have either adopted some zoning policies to prevent their exponential growth within certain zones. Cleveland is looking to adopt it. They have not adopted it. But I found that this really struck me because I wouldn't know this just thinking. So this is an article from the Institute of Local Self-Reliance, which did a lot of research in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and their first outburst of dollar store chains. And they noted that since 2011, the number of dollar stores nationwide has climbed from about 20,000 to nearly 30,000. And there are now more dollar stores than Walmart and McDonald's locations combined. And that really, really struck me. Walmart and McDonald's, those are two of the biggest chains that you could think of when you are thinking about food. And now that these dollar stores are really infiltrating the market, and the reality is they're obviously there. They're at every corner, and they're feeding people. So we saw that they're not necessarily selling our ideal foods. However, they can afford more of the risk of taking on the challenge to provide more increased access to healthy foods because they can afford things like refrigerators and constant deliveries and staffing someone to check on the quality of what they're selling. But as we see it, they're really not. However, they're still feeding people. So it was one of the stories that I wanted to look at in relationship to this food database that we have to see, like, we knew it was happening, but really digging into the data and looking at some specific items, there really wasn't that much change as far as increasing healthy food access. So I want to turn it back over to Elaine.
We're doing okay.
Yeah.
All right, so that was good. Thank you. And I know this is where I'm sure folks would like to stop. We're going to come back. Particularly, I think we'd like to open the discussion around Rachel's presentation. But we wanted to at least show you. So this now we want to say to you too. This is really we just put this together. Literally, Rachel just appended the 2019 data in the last couple weeks. So, but we wanted to at least ourselves even look. If you take these top 5 categories and we've combined these two, what does it look like over time, right? And what you basically see is that there's a fairly consistency here, but as we know in our classification system, there is some wishy-washiness to these categories. And so I think the other thing that Rachel might not have said is that our next step is to actually take her index and try putting it across all the stores and just seeing if there's a way in which we could improve to have a better sense of these non-3, because if these are not changing and they haven't changed that much over 8 years, then where are the other opportunities for change? But I will say that this is this was also like at 11:30 at night last night after I closed everything down. I was like, oh, I could do a bar chart. Because I think, and I was hoping it would tell a little bit of a different story, but it's the same table. So you see the stability, very low, and the stability of supermarkets, but it does appear that there has been a slow trend upward in the large grocery. So that's a good sign. I mean, I think that part. But even in the small grocery, you could just see the fluidity of what's in the stores to keep it at that level. And then this, we really need to look at ourselves more. We tend to think that we got much more serious about the way these were classified as we got into the period. And so it's very possible that the changes in these are because these got reclassified into something different once we were able to look more closely. But let's just take a real quick look. Now this is from just 2012 to 2018. And I think it does give you some sense of, it's not just a mean change, right? There's a lot of things going on in between. So in 2012, there were 14 supermarkets. In 2018, of those 14, so I took basically all the ones, these 656 stores that we had in 2012. What happened going forward to them? Okay? And so of the 14 we had, 10 were still there and still called a supermarket. You can't improve from there, but 3 of them stepped down to a supermarket and 1 closed. And we know that that's the Giant Eagle on Buckeye, right? So, which has now been replaced. But that's a change. So this is basically, did they improve or did they go down a category or close? So within the large groceries, there were 32. About 72% stayed the same. 1 increased to be considered a supermarket. 2 closed, but you can see that's a fairly significant drop. 6 of them dropped down 1 category or more. Similarly with the small groceries, the flip of that is that of the 42 in 2012, 7 of them improved. So that means there wasn't a change. And looking back at you guys, this is a good way to look to see. I can pull you out. We can pull you the stores out, see who they are. Are they the result of these evaluation or these programs? At the same time, though, 3 closed, and a number of them just changed. Or this probably is in this case. I think I looked at it. It really was a takeout, but actually had some fresh vegetables in that. And so by the next time it was gone. And then you see this is really where, like we saw, how much transition there was. So of the 568, 92 of them closed 8 years later, 27 changed. But similarly, looking at these 2, this is what gave me quite a bit of hope here, is that there was, of those 568, granted it's not a lot, but 27 of them then went up to being a corner store, and 6 increased all the way to being a large grocery. So there was change noticed. And I think the point of this is just to show that as we clean this database up more and more, and every year the students come in, we dig in deeper to get more details on it, I think we'll be able to do more with this. Okay, I'm going to do it very quickly because I really want to spend the rest of the time. This was what I was mentioning to you. In 2015, we did a BRFSS survey. This is a random representative survey of residents, of all residents of the city of Cleveland. They are sampled to represent the characteristics of the city and then weighted to that. But I'm going to show it to you by neighborhood. The folks are not recruited or selected by their neighborhood. They're selected just to be representative of the city. But because we had over 200 residents, I think it's a nice way to at least look at it. So in there, we asked the question, how satisfied are you with the overall quality of food sold in your neighborhood? From very satisfied to very dissatisfied on a 5-point scale. And this is just their dissatisfaction, and what I mentioned before earlier. So the higher the color into red, the more dissatisfied they are. And what you see is, remember, so here's up here you can see. So this is the Collinwood, Glenville, Euclid Green. Now you're into the east side. Now I will tell you that at the time, this is in 15, downtown was still in this. We have not pulled downtown out of everything. But it does give you a sense that this is where the significant dissatisfaction is. And as the maps we've seen, they somewhat reflect. And so what I then had Ortis do was we mapped out then the dissatisfaction with the healthy, which is those top 3, and the corner stores and convenience stores. And so I have to say, when you look at this is where the spatial, I'm looking at you guys in the back, this is where the spatialness, the spatial analysis could come in, because there's, based on looking at it, you do see a lot of healthy food here, right? But this is where the dissatisfaction is the highest. All right, so this is stuff where I almost didn't put it in because I wasn't quite sure how to talk about it, other than I wanted to at least know that, again, we can map, at least it's 3 or 4 years old, but we can map residential perceptions to the objective data. And that's it. Wow. We did well. Yeah, I thought we did. So I'm going to pose the first question, and I'm going to bring it back to Rachel's. And that is that I think when we were digging into this, and I think I've said this publicly a lot, thinking that if the supermarkets are not going to change, what's our other options? So what do you take of this? Do you think that it's moving? For those of you that are working in the area of food, does it look like it's moving to you? And what do you think the next steps are based on what you see, especially in this area of maybe the big box stores? So I'll leave it open, or maybe I'll look at Morgan and say, do you want to?
You repeat the question, Elaine?
Well, give me your because you guys are the ones that are in the trenches of trying to move this. So what do you think of this? I know it's a lot to unpack.
It's a lot to unpack. I think with our work with the smaller stores, I think the access and education combination, along with a financial incentive for healthy choices. We've been piloting some work here in Cleveland with the Heart Smarts program, which is a SNAP-Ed curriculum, along with Heart Bucks to be used for healthy items in stores. We've seen major changes with the 4 stores that we're in right now, both in Mount Pleasant and in East Cleveland, in terms of changing inventory and pushing changes in procurement patterns of the store owners themselves. I think it's also showed us that each of those strategies or interventions individually aren't successful without the other. And it really needs to be a layered intervention in order to build demand, encourage customers to try new types of products. But in terms of the larger landscape with dollar stores, we've been very unsuccessful partnering with them because they are organized through such a hierarchy of corporate structure, and there's often not local decision making. So for us, working with small business owners who are locally based has been a much more successful strategy. In terms of the grocery and supermarket landscape, there has been a lot of flux the last couple of years with Dave's closing 2 stores, building the new store at Midtown, Simon's taking over some locations, both in Cleveland but then also in the First Ring. I think there's some questions about the quality of those stores. It may still look like a supermarket, but a supermarket is not a supermarket, is not a supermarket. And I think probably your folks who are out in these teams and communities notice the difference, even though it looks the same on the map. There's a very different dynamic with some of these supermarkets who have not promised or have not delivered on the promises that they made when they came in. So the value, I think, of qualitative data and stories and residents and community members' perspectives that can really bring maps and data like this to life, I think is really essential to understanding some of the other dynamics at play with some of these stores. I also think safety is a concern. And so when you look at folks where there might technically be healthy items, but there's perceptions around safety and security with residents in those stores, the access is not just about transportation, it's also about whether you feel welcome in that store and safe in that store. And I think that can also really change dynamics in terms of if I perceive that I have healthy food, access to healthy food in my own community. So those are just some of my...
Meaning that influences those reception,
And not so much about safety of the store itself, but safety on my way to that store, and crossing the street, or all of that.
Interesting.
Which is why that perception is kind of what I was thinking about.
That's actually driving it. Interestingly, though, we do have data from 2008 and 9, the RFSS, and there was a huge jump in positive perception. Now, there's a couple things that changed in that because in 2008 it was only land-based phones, and in 2015 it was half cell phone and half land-based. So you've got a little bit, but the demographics of the two populations, and it's done on it's a national chain that does it, right? So we assume that there's a similar methodology in that, but there was a substantial change. It was like, well, what is that then? And I actually thought we might see it in the objective data, but it's not there.
How are you scoring the supermarkets who are also liquor stores and selling cigarettes?
This is always a good one. Right.
So, we don't really, in our classification system right now, we don't account for like bumping you down in essence for having those things. It's really more so just, do you have a minimum of this that we're looking for in your business to qualify at the highest level possible based on the availability of those foods. But a good thing to note because I think we're going to move into more of a scoring system versus like this classification that mixes the business aspect and the food availability aspect together, but just really look at the food availability. And something like that could certainly be built into a real scoring system where, okay, now you also are carrying liquor, which Good.
And it depends on what your question is, right?
Yeah.
We've had an ongoing discussion here. Is it trying to really tackle and understand where the healthy food is available regardless of where it is? Or is it looking at what is the healthy food landscape look like? And so like if you're in a community, if you're in a neighborhood, and some of them I've shown you, if you're in a neighborhood where there's very little access to those top two, and you're inundated with corner stores that you see don't have even one, probably a fresh vegetable. So what's that tell you? What kind of what are you thinking about the kind of food choices you're going to make? It's not like you're driving by a Giant Eagle every day and saying, oh, gee, you know. So your exposure, and you know, we know from some of the work we've done with kids in Cleveland, a lot of kids do not get very far out of their neighborhoods. And so what they see is what they see, or what they experience as being food availability is what they see in their neighborhood.
Great.
Yeah. So yeah.
I think the assessment is not complete till you don't look not only strictly locally, but state-wise and even comparable in background metropolitan areas but elsewhere. Let's say, how does the Cleveland situation compare with, let's say, Columbus, Cincinnati,
Sure.
Right.
or with places in another state, but maybe background closer to Cleveland, let's say Detroit. They might have some ideas, and if nothing else, at least end up with a collaboration and cry on each other's shoulders. There is strength in numbers.
Well, that's pretty, yeah, so I know Morgan, so for the last 2 years, the Food Trust has been, from Philadelphia has been here, right? And Morgan and the crew, at least I'm in, who else here from your group, but like, you know, I think there's been, that's well understood, that this is there's a context in which this is been placed. I will say to you though, when we first, I had it in a slide originally, really I think when we first did this in 12, we mostly had interns and navigators that we thought, we have a summer, they're not in the schools. What can we do with them, right? And also, how do we give kids who are interested, students who are interested in public health, how do we help them get real exposure to what it's like to do real public health? And we will tell you, I mean, Maddie, all those, anybody that served as a coordinator, we've lost students or interns midway through the summer when we send them out. And they're like, holy Moses, if this is what public health is, I can't do this. So it's a good, it was not just what we did here from a food sense. This has been like a global, yeah, much bigger. So it gave students an opportunity. It gave us a chance to also collect data that we couldn't possibly have done as investigators on our own or staff for other projects. Right? So saying that, though, I totally agree, but I would say too, this wasn't really created to do it. And I would say that the teams that are doing research are, in fact, like Darcy's group, Erica, these guys have done other things where you take this and compare it out to national. I can tell you that we've used this database in our impact study, right? We have 4 years of data of overweight kids where we know what their food environment, their neighborhood looks like. So we have all that, we have all their, you know, their A1Cs and all these kinds of real, biomarker data that you could link to what's in their environment. So there's a lot of, but for the purposes of this was really to bring it out, to say, this is here. We don't want it to sit dormant. We'd like to, we didn't actually put that slide up, but we do have a request form that if you want to use the data, if you're a student and want to analyze the data or come join, then let us know. Okay? All right, so you had a question in the back.
Oh yeah, I just had a question since you mentioned like the interns going out and everything. I was just wondering if high school students, if this is something that they could like,
I know.
do or
We had 2 at one point, but just recently there was something from the university about high school students, and we have not sent them out. And this is a little tough, I think, unless they really are savvy, right? Because they're only going with one other person into the stores. And so I think we've also decided that, you know, college students, graduate students are they've been around a little bit more, know how to handle themselves. Yeah.
like even high school students like with in-betweens that.
Oh no, that would, I mean, yeah, that's a good idea.
Like that's what I mean. Like high school students who are within the surrounding, but
Yeah.
in the actual community.
Yeah.
Like, there have to be people I think who would be actually in public health and like the mission and whatnot. So I think think that could be interesting.
Yeah.
Because they're familiar with people and.
Did we ever do, Lauren, I think we didn't give you any credit in this either, but did we ever seek out, and have we ever done a reach out to the Cleveland schools? And anybody know that we did? It's actually a really good, like, even like some of the health.
John Hay would be a natural.
John Hay, yeah, it's right here.
But I think by the time we were getting ready to do it, they're out of school,
School.
and
Trying to
we
get
don't
them
have
as,
that connection.
to think about that. That's a good one. All right, yep, no, David.
Yeah, so I've been wondering what role technology has in terms of changing the food system, and is there a way of incorporating that aspect in your classification, or like how can it inform, this food environment? And the other thing I was wondering is this uptick, you talk about uptick in the perception of food environment, where you see it change from landline and a mix of cell phone
Yeah.
and landline. In that particular analysis, did you adjust for like age?
Yeah, and the age of the two groups are not different.
Oh,
So really, and actually, we said too, like, and actually, the 15 sample had a higher poverty level. It was not, like, the things that we would have thought might have changed, like younger people. Now, granted, now, they also select based on getting that citywide sample, right? So they're going to they only recruit until they get the proportion that fits into the percentages they had, right? Now, I thought you were going to say about technology. The other thing we have, like, we have farmers markets. We have community garden layers, right? I'm looking at Andrew and Jackie in the back. Like, we should say, Ortis was your student, yes?
Yeah.
At Kent. So yes, and still is? No, he's not. Okay, you're not going to. Okay, yeah. So he's at Kent State, and because of different reasons, but he's been wonderful. But I think that talking to him about all the different things we could layer on this. Like, I like the idea of even we have crime data. And we have a lot of data, and I think, Andrew, you could talk about what I think Morgan just mentioned, which is, like, how do you do the qualitative pieces around this? And again, I would say from the perspective of the PRC, what's the value of it? We can do it, but how is it going to be used? And it's a pretty hefty financial thing to invest in. But I think that's what we're looking for too. Is like, what do people see in the value of it for the city of Cleveland?
Just as a follow-up, for the access satisfaction question, were they probed whether or not it was like geographic access or financial access?
Neither. It just says availability. But we do have a lot of sub-questions like pricing and all those other.
Okay.
And those are, and we do start out first by asking them what their neighborhood is, so that the context is that. But yeah, it's hard to know.
They get you could have the healthy food in your neighborhood and still not be able to access it.
Yes. Yes, absolutely. Because that's the same truth. The dissatisfaction with price is also the highest where the dissatisfaction overall is. Yes. Andrew?
So are you, how many more years do you plan to do this?
I mean, as long as we can come up.
As long as there's value.
Yeah, as long as there's value and as long as there's finances, yes.
Because I mean, we do now have technologies that can allow you to do that sort of navigating and collecting the built environments, so you can record the built environment
Yes.
by just driving through it. And then you don't have to, what we've done in other cities where we've done similar surveys, is you don't have to do something with every data layer all the time. You archive it.
Mm-hmm.
So you can then just focus in. So what you're doing in terms of going to stores, that's great. But the rest of it, you don't have to attack it all every single time.
Yeah.
But as long as you keep that yearly survey, you can always then go back as the question changes. Okay, let's see how this particular neighbourhood has changed over the last 2 or 3 years.
Yeah.
So, I mean, you don't always have to do everything.
But then how do you though, because I think what the basis of this was really to be that location-based surveillance. And we don't show it, but some of these stores change. They change names. The location is always something,
Right.
but it's changing. And so if they don't go back to it.
No, but actually what we've got is we could drive through that neighbourhood where you're recording the video.
It's sort of like an archive,
And
yeah.
then we have software where you've got an archive of all these videos. You could put a box around one area, and it will extract out all the video that intersect with that one box, irrespective of time frame.
Ah, I
So,
see.
I mean, you can now automate the lot of that
Was
data
it the-
collection rather
Yeah,
than sort of
yeah.
putting lots and lots of people in. Now, going into the stores and doing that type of assessment, that's always going to be, you know, logistically a challenge, and that's great data you're collecting.
Yeah.
In terms of the built environment around it, I mean, you can now probably do it with a little less sort of
Intensity or, yeah,
intensity.
yeah. So does this intrigue you guys?
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, yeah.
So, in many presentations, we always see the city of Cleveland map.
Yes.
And if it's maternal child health, if it's obesity, diabetes, asthma, we see these high concentrated areas. We look at the lack of resources for areas, and it goes back to redlining, and people map it. My question is, when we think about the call to action, so have you thought about bringing it to city council? Do you think about policy changes? What can we do? I mean, I think the presentation was great, but I always think about residents, when I speak to them, is, you know, they're presented with the information, but what power do they have? How can we advocate for them? How can we empower them? How can we hold systems and leaders accountable for what's going on? Because we see the health outcomes within the city. It's all over the U.S. I mean, Cleveland is not highlighted the way that we should be. We write things at all times. So I'm just wondering, has that been a part of the conversation as you've been looking at the data?
Well, I was going to say, the data is sort of one thing, but clearly there's a number of groups in the center that are doing different aspects, and I think you guys should probably talk about it. Like they've had 2 REACH grants, 2 5-year REACH grants that have focused a large part of this. There's been all the new food trust stuff. So do you guys want to?
I mean, I would just say, I think, as a generalization, I think corner stores and convenience stores are ignored by small business associations, economic development departments. They are operating kind of off the grid of any kind of technical assistance, forgivable loans and grants that we often provide other entrepreneurs. I think that's because there are sometimes aspects of their business that might be a little more informal, a little more underground, and they often don't have like point of sale systems to really track. But I think it's a missed opportunity not to invest in storefront renovation, for example, when you talk about Good Harvest in
I totally agree.
when you talk about
What that would do if you.
other stores and other communities, like how do we create those? Because I'll tell you, I think the other piece of the story that's missing is from a corner store and convenience stores, these are community hubs in different ways
Yes.
that the supermarket is not.
Right.
And I think it's an opportunity to reach people in different ways that we often overlook. They are filled with life. And so how do we use policy and investment to help some of these stores make some changes so they reflect the life that's in them?
Right.
I also think if we are using public financing for new supermarkets, that we need strict community benefits agreements about the employment conditions, who's hired, how they're trained, and some of those other pieces of these projects that really lead to kind of further upstream strategies when addressing the root causes of poverty. I don't think we have good community benefits agreements in place right now for these projects, and I think some of these businesses are getting around them, and there's not enough accountability to really make sure we're leveraging these business opportunities for the communities in which they're located. So those are 2 that kind of come to mind for me.
I want to add, because I think that's like one of the things we think about a lot is the policy and kind of the higher level. But one of the things that I think we've done differently in Cleveland, in contrast to other cities that we see doing some of this work, is a more intentional and intensive engagement of residents as leaders and partners in selection of stores, in programming in stores, in connecting with stores, and really thinking about social connectedness with residents in those places to leverage them as hubs and to make them valued and to see value in them. And that, I think, if you want to speak more to that, but I think there are some things that are happening here in Cleveland that programmatically are available in other cities, but we are doing leaps and bounds better. We're becoming, I think we're becoming the model because of how we're approaching
As
things
usual,
differently.
you always think we're behind.
And we got to write it up.
Yeah, that's what
tell
I was
everybody that we're
saying.
doing it. But it's going so, like, that's where it is, and you know, it can be seen as risky because there's no business that's accountable or policymaker that's accountable, but it's working.
And I think they are divisive. I mean, we talk with community members who want to just shut them down, but I think by dismissing them, we're dismissing a whole group of people in these communities that really rely on them. And if we don't invest and figure out ways to work together, we're just dismissing a whole group of people as well. So I know we run into both sides all the time, but I think to just ignore is a missed opportunity for the community and for the business owner as well. So I think we got to keep working on those strategies, but I think there's tremendous opportunity.
And I think too, that there's this, when we first started this research, there was a lot of, or this project, there was a lot of pushback on the resident side about like, oh, the store owners don't care about us, you know, they're only selling pop cigarettes and beer and all that stuff. If you spend time in stores, pretty much every customer that comes through, whoever's working knows their name. They're asking, how's your sister doing? How's your family doing? There is this like social connectedness there. So the stores that we really view that in are also the stores that are more likely to engage and, you know, support the work that we're trying to put through. So I think it really takes like a lot. I think the qualitative side of all of this is like really going to put some pieces to it, and then it also shows that, you know, these are hubs and they are, we can make them healthier because they're woven into all these communities, and they're not going to go anywhere. So we have to look at it.
So we have to end, but I will make one comment I would make to it, which I think Morgan, you said, and I think we have not done that, is that as much as that, you know, we all know redlining was a way upstream thing, right? It's the same thing here. You know, we're working in the trenches, but probably the most effective long-term thing is to change the things you're talking about. So going and why are loans different? Why are grants different? Like that's probably the place. If you change that, then it filters down, right? Or the whole community benefit formula for businesses in general. If you change that, it would change things downstream that you know, so that'd be my advocate. See, all right. Thank you all for coming. Appreciate it, Rachel. Thank you. Good job.